have this space, but I had to stay with him for all the naps.
Yeah, and that space had traditionally been like the nap room, but somebody in their late 20s napping is different from somebody in their late 20 months.
Yeah.
And their nap needs are very, very different. Yeah. So yeah, there was a lot of...
So there was like a cot and like a couple of bottles of Clorox.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, the dimmers are back there and things like that.
It was a light board, yeah.
It was, I mean, ultimately it was like somewhat comfortable, but it made it so that even at that point, I think this is like an early indication of the going through the writing process in retrospect, was that like either Justine or I needed to be with Miles. And so there were a lot of demands on my time as leader of the Umbrella Project, so a lot of the time Justine was off with Miles, and then Justine led workshops and was like in various projects.
I did, yeah.
And I had no participation in those because I would take the kids. So, the split of time, somebody was always with Miles, and it became evident that it was hard for him to be in like a rehearsal process for any length of time. Like he could be in the room for a while, and so that people were consulting.
No, and also like this is like a perspective too. Like when you're a breastfeeding mom, like that's the kid's gonna want you. Like the end.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, at the same time, it's also been really fun, I think, to like get a chance to travel with Miles that much. There's a lot of opportunities that he probably won't remember that we've traveled for this and for other things. It helped us learn a lot about traveling. For instance, when we went to Edinburgh in 2015. Yeah. We had been visiting family in California, and that's an 8-hour time difference.
Yeah.
And so it takes an hour a day for a kid to adjust. And so he's like, I want dinner. And it was 3 a.m. in Edinburgh, and it took like a week. In 2014 when we went, he was going through a transitional phase where he became much more aware of the world. So we were like, Justine was, right after he was born, Justine was completing the Second City Conservatory here in Toronto, and he had been, like, in the back, just sort of, like, hanging out with me or somebody.
Like a potato.
Yeah, like, and we're like, yeah, he can totally go to shows. And then we went to a sketch comedy show.
And he was like, like stressed out because it was
and
loud.
we were like in the middle row, in the middle of it, and there's no place for us to go. And and he was like, he was trying to nurse him to comfort him, and like we totally got called out by the people on stage. And there were people that like through just like 1 degree of separation, we got like, let's apologize. We'll buy you a round of drinks because essentially, we brought a screaming infant into a adult sketch comedy show.
Yeah, that's specifically said no.
A previously unscreaming infant.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, no, previously totally oblivious.
Yeah, and so that's still, I think, in our books is our most lackluster parenting decision.
There have been other pretty bad ones.
Yeah, but I think I have a colleague at York, Laura Levin, who is creator, dramaturg, writer, scholar, and she has 2 kids, and she and her husband both have very demanding jobs. He works in an environment that he can't really bring them, and so there was at one point where we were like, there was event that we were at over the weekend. She's like, this is part of who I am. Like, this is part of my identity. I am a mom. I can't just, like, I can't be professor or theater creator and then, like, put the mom thing aside. And I think about that a lot because kids are here. Like, this recording, not when somebody hears it, but if they were to hear the unedited audio, is much more extended because, we're managing kids. Our meetings in developing the work has been different than we sort of expected, and Justine Justine more than I, but we've had to step out. It's very infrequent that both of us are in the room during the development, and then later Justine and I will catch up about what's going on there.
Yeah, usually like while the kids are napping in a stroller. Yes. Like we can walk together and talk about it.
We'll talk about things. And there was one other thing that I was saying there.
I love you.
I love you. I mean, so I'll put this out there, and I think that, and I'm also going to say, hopefully no offense, Maggie, I think Justine's the strongest writer of the three of us. She's the most experienced writer of the three of us. Like, she's written the most. She's like she has defined herself of that as the longest. And I will say with confidence that I am the opposite. I am on the other end of the spectrum. Before this project, I didn't think I was going to write any of it. I was like, I'm a producer, I'm a creator, I have ideas, I'm good at editing and like that sort of dramaturgical consistency, but I don't necessarily see myself as a writer. But things needed to be written.
Yeah.
So I wrote them, and just about everything I write for this or other stuff I put in front of Justine because she is a strong writer, and I want to make sure things make sense. So we had to figure out how to work.
Yeah.
And it changed our timetable a little bit.
For sure.
But I think that we've ended up with something very strong.
Yeah.
Yes.
I learn a lot from them.
That's what it seems like. It seems like a solid thing.
But also, like, I mean, yes, I'm unexperienced in certain ways, but it's important to me to start my work in a sustainable way and to know what's coming up. And it's been really great to watch Ian and Justine and how they're working on this, and to kind of make room in my artistic process and in my personal life to understand if I want the things I want, this is what's required.
Looks like, yeah.
And just even from a content basis, if you're going to write about families, it should be real. It should be there are children in the room. Like, this is important to me. So I've loved the process because of that.
And Maggie's been a very good sport about coming at nap times and not knocking and that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I've developed a saying since having kids that, because I like to bring the kids to meetings at this point, and it's, or Justine may have actually originated this thought, but if you have an actual baby in the room, no one can act like a baby. So it really smooths things with the adult collaborators in a room when there's an actual like needy baby in the room, because everybody else realizes they need to be an adult.
If you guys can summarize transmission for those people, what is that?
Sexy, trashy romp to the backwoods of Missouri. No, none of those things. I guess it's a little sexy in moments, but I think it's,
it's not sexy.
It's not sexy.
It's got all the things you need.
Yeah.
I think that before we get there, because you're asking if there's anything that was there, I know that we wanted to talk about. I wanted to just quickly mention like the importance of real science and how that aspect played into it, and that that sort of dramaturgy point in there. And if I can jump off from there, is that we wrote everything and we were doing a lot of research. And so as far as vetting, and we want it to be as real as possible, because also in the show we don't spend a lot of time on a ship. Like, we didn't have to really... I feel like in storytelling, unless you can really sell it, like, let the audience imagine something. I don't want to give that away, but it's like... I remember getting really angry at seeing a play that was about some screenwriters who were having trouble selling their amazing screenplay, and then they tried to have someone read part of the screenplay in the middle of this show, and I was like, oh, well, you just failed, because you've been telling us that this thing is amazing, and now you've tried to show it, but it can't be any better than the actual show, or you should have written that thing instead because you had this amazing idea. And now the integrity of your premise is gone. And so same sort of here is that we don't know what aliens look like or what they would look like. And we could spend time inventing that universe, but because we were focused on the personal drama and the decision-making of the humans, we could let a lot of that sort of exist in the greater world and the greater imagination of the audience. And as a result, there's also this idea, it's like, okay, we don't have to imaginally think of a ship that someone would believe in the world of science fiction, because we're not going to show it, but what would it actually look like? How do we get these people to actually be believable as scientists? How do we have that sort of integrity for it? And that was coming out of a lot of our inspiration materials as well that we were going back to as science fiction, either written by or written for those who were scientifically literate, if not actually scientists. And at some point, it was like, well, we should start talking to some scientists. And then so we started talking to some scientists. It's like, oh, they're really interesting.
Fascinating.
That could, like, maybe the way that we keep from having to have all this exposition about the science in the show is by coming up with a companion, like, reader, which turned into the podcast. Like, let's reach out to all of these scientists and see if they'll be interviewed for the podcast, so that we then can skip ahead and say, like, no, listen to the podcast and we'll talk about all of those, like, background, that conversation in the present day. And that's proved exhilarating and has led us down the road of thinking about what the next... There was an idea at one point that we would recreate the show as it is presented in Edinburgh for another city, and so it would effectively be a tour. But there's been so much interesting that's come out of our conversations through the podcast or around the podcast. That's like thinking about the other stories that can be told in this universe in which we have not anchored ourselves in a specific description of what an alien civilization is.
Yeah.
One of the most, like, exciting, scary things to this for me was when those interviews started happening with the scientists. Because it'd be like every week they'd be like, wait, what if we did this? What if we change this now? And it'd be like, wait, we've been working on this for so long. But, like, it's because the science is almost more exciting than the fiction at times. Like, there's so much more room to grow with that. And for me, that's been so exciting because I read so much science fiction before we actually started developing the real mechanics of the story to kind of dramaturgically get in the mode of things. And it's amazing how much that ended up being almost limiting, because it's like, well, they did this in this story. This famous author did this. Well, we can't do the same thing. Like, we need to, like, know our story's different. But then once we started getting to the science, it was like, oh, what if we did this? What if we did this? And this actually, like, is a real science thing. And, like, people will be interested in this. And that, to me, also became super exciting in terms of what kind of audiences will hopefully listen to it, to transmission, will participate in it, because we're not just bringing them another science fiction story. We're bringing them something that's grounded in facts, and that should be a new common ground.
Yeah. If I can cite one example of, like, one of the more unsettling changes that came out of the conversations around the podcast, I think it's before we actually started recording. Originally, the show was set in the present day. And so before, like, after Indy, we sort of had this idea of what each of the characters was going to be, and we were sort of each responsible for coming up with these character sketches. We always knew that there would be someone who would leave, like, the one who left, and that was sort of like, we downplayed them, that they weren't going to be present, because that's how we had sort of played it in the workshop in Indianapolis. But what became interesting was, like, the first thing that became interesting in there was that we assigned me to write the story, the backstory of the person who left, and I essentially just I didn't feel like myself as a white cisgendered male really needed to be in another show. Like, there's plenty of leaders of scientific missions. Like, I thought it would be more interesting for us to explore something different within there. And so, sort of from a dramaturgical standpoint, we were looking at, like, the motivations for this character for leaving, but and leaving to never come back, but also, like, serving humanity. And so this idea of somebody coming from a conflict area, or who had connections to an area that was in a lot of conflict. And one of a really good friend of mine from college, from university, who we went to architecture school together, but her dad came from Iran to the United States in the 70s, before the fall of the Shah, before the revolution, on a program where the U.S. was paying Iranian like for Iranian scientists to get advanced training in nuclear technology. And there's this really interesting history of like the connection of the U.S. and the Iranian nuclear programs, and those who stayed and those who left, and we were like borrowing